Hey there, CA Final students, and welcome to this session. Look, if you're gearing up for those November exams under the new syllabus and maybe looking at the AICSS Advanced IT module with just a little bit of anxiety, take a deep breath. You can consider me your dedicated smart tutor. Today, we are completely demystifying Unit 1, Forensic Accounting and Fraud Detection. I'm going to treat you like a complete beginner, and by the end of this explainer, you are going to have a rock-solid, totally exam-ready understanding of these crucial concepts. So let's just get right into it. Here is our game plan for today. We'll start with the bloodhound mindset, then move on to the net worth theory, the expenditure theory, data and intelligence, empowering laws, and finally, some exam prep.
Okay, Section 1, the bloodhound mindset. To pass this exam, we really need to shift your perspective from a traditional auditor to a full-on investigator.
There's this classic saying in the accounting world, you've probably heard it. An auditor is a watchdog, not a bloodhound. Think about a regular statutory auditor as a watchdog sitting out on the front porch, right? Their job is basically to keep an eye on the financials, make sure everything complies, and bark if something is obviously wrong. But a forensic accountant, well, you are the bloodhound. And a bloodhound is a breed built for hunting. You don't just sit back and watch. You're actively hunting for information. You're aggressively picking up the scent of fraud, and you literally search for errors and hidden trails.
Moving on to Section 2, net worth theory. Now that you've got that bloodhound mindset locked in, let's talk about your primary hunting tool for tracing unreported income.
The logic we use here is incredibly simple, but trust me, it is heavily tested. First, you calculate the change in a person's net worth from the beginning of the financial year to the end. Basically, you're asking, how much richer did they get on paper? Second, you add back all their personal and family expenses during that year. Third, and this is the absolutely crucial part, you deduct any hoarded cash. Why? Well, if they had, say, old cash stuffed under a mattress from years ago, spending it today doesn't actually count as new income for this specific year. Finally, doing all that gives you their true gross income. If that number turns out to be higher than what they actually reported on their tax returns, boom, you found your fraud.
Let's actually put some numbers to this with the Babarao example, which is straight out of your module. If we look at the year 2019 to 2020, Babarao's net worth increased by roughly 25.9 lakhs. Then we add back his personal family expenses of about 12.1 lakhs. That means his true gross income had to be at least 38 lakhs just to fund that kind of lifestyle and asset growth. So as an investigator, you'd take that 38 lakh figure and compare it straight against his filed income tax return. If he only declared, say, 15 lakhs, you've got 23 lakhs of unexplained and very likely illegal wealth on your hands. Section 3, applying the expenditure theory. So what happens when net worth theory fails us? Let's say our suspect is smart enough not to buy assets in their own name. If they don't have a measurable net worth, that first theory totally falls apart. That's exactly when we pull out our second tool, the expenditure theory. This theory just follows the cash. If a person's cash uses, meaning their pure spending, exceeds their known cash sources, that excess points straight to unknown illegal funds. For the exam, you absolutely must memorize the 5 specific circumstances where you'd use this. It's when no books of accounts are maintained, when books are just not available, when records are inadequate, when the taxpayer is actively withholding records, or, and this is a big one, when the taxpayer has no visible assets but is clearly out there spending a fortune. This is the exact scenario in the Salathil Dinizan example from your book, where his visible assets are 0, but his lifestyle spending is massive. It points directly to dirty money.
Section 4, gathering intelligence and data. Finding the numbers.
Okay, so we've got our theories, but where are we actually finding the data to plug into them? We basically gather information in 2 ways, financial data and intelligence. Financial data gives you the hard, documented evidence. For the exam, you need to remember the 12 key sources here. We're talking about search records, public records, life insurance policies, home improvements, tax returns, financial statements, bank statements, credit card statements, living expenses, vehicles, securities, and property taxes. Intelligence, on the other hand, is active investigative legwork. You've got 8 core methods for this: running background checks, tracking cash purchases, conducting corporate checks, investigating the spouse or associates, using wiretaps, pulling telephone records, issuing bank information requests, or directly gathering account information to dig up hidden entities.
And speaking of gathering data, credit cards are an absolute goldmine for investigators. You see, a regular bank statement just shows a single lump sum payment going to Visa or MasterCard. It doesn't tell you much, but getting your hands on the actual credit card statement reveals 3 vital things.
First, the exact nature of their spending. Are they secretly buying hidden assets like jewelry? Second, it shows their credit limit, which is a huge hint at their true hidden income turnover. And third, it lets you instantly assess the person's overall financial credibility.
Moving to Section 5, Laws Empowering Forensic Accountants. Now we're talking about your legal badge.
We know how to hunt, but we need to know the legal frameworks we operate under in India. There are 7 key statutes you've got to know. They range from the SEBI Act all the way to the IT Act for cybercrimes. A really important one to flag is the PMLA, the Prevention of Money Laundering Act of 2002. Under Section 3 of the PMLA, if you directly or indirectly attempt to indulge in, or even just knowingly assist in hiding the proceeds of a crime, you are guilty of money laundering. Also, heavily underline the Income Tax Act for your prep. You specifically need to know Section 68 for unexplained cash credits, Section 69 for unexplained investments, Section 69A for unexplained money or jewelry, and Section 69C for unexplained expenditures.
But honestly, the absolute holy grail for your exam is the Companies Act of 2013. You have to map these sections out in your head. Section 447 is the big one. It deals with the broad punishment for fraud. Section 7, subsection 5, covers fraud during the actual initial registration of a company. Section 36 is all about fraudulently inducing people to invest. Section 213 gets triggered when a business is being run specifically to defraud its creditors. And definitely look out for Section 229. This is the specific charge for giving false statements or the mutilation and destruction of vital documents. Oh, and once you master these, make sure you also review your FAIS standards. Knowing the objectives from FAIS 110 covering basic principles all the way through 610 covering reporting is absolutely essential because they dictate your whole procedural checklist.
Section 6, Exam Prep and Review. Let's test your knowledge.
All right, let's shift gears and do some rapid-fire exam prep straight from the module. For your MCQs, you're definitely going to be asked how digital evidence is used in financial investigations. Think about it. Modern business is almost entirely virtual now. Almost all transactions leave an electronic footprint, so the correct answer is D. Digital evidence is used to track financial activity and identify fraud. But a quick pro tip: as an investigator, you've got to preserve this digital evidence properly, or else it just gets completely thrown out of court.
Here's another concept they love testing: ratio analysis. Now, ratio analysis isn't some magic tool for recovering deleted files or tracing individual money movements. The correct answer here is A. It's used to compare different financial data points to assess the overall financial health of a company. It's like checking a pulse. If the ratios look wildly unnatural compared to normal industry standards, well, that's when the bloodhound in you should really start digging.
Okay, here is your ultimate master summary cheat sheet. Literally take a mental screenshot of this. The auditor is the watchdog. The forensic accountant is the bloodhound. You're going to use the net worth theory when you can actually track asset growth, and you'll pivot to the expenditure theory when the suspect has zero visible assets but suspiciously high cash spending. For the legal side, anchor yourself to Section 447 of the Companies Act for overall fraud punishment. And just a final tutor tip before we wrap: do not confuse a Ponzi scheme with a pyramid scheme. A Ponzi scheme relies on getting new investors to pay off the old ones, whereas a pyramid scheme relies on recruiting members to sell products. Also, make sure you know the difference between your primary original documents and your secondary electronic evidence. As our lives, and more importantly, our assets, move completely into the cyber world, the temptation for digital theft is only going to skyrocket. The role of the forensic accountant has literally never been more critical than it is right now. I really hope this explainer has given you the clarity and the confidence you need. Best of luck on those November exams. Now get out there and be the bloodhound.